And so I said something like, well, Mr. Seller, that's what I mean. I don't want your perception of what we would make or you feeling the need to count our pockets to prevent you from getting what it is that you truly need for your family, because then nobody wins. And at the end of the day, the property is going to qualify for what it does. And I'm going to fight and I'm going to try and get as much as I can for you. But what's most important is we need to figure out how to get you out of here in the next several weeks. Welcome to the Ryan Rice Show, where we talk about what we learned yesterday that we can apply today so that we can be better tomorrow. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. I got a new deal this week where I put a house in contract for about $40,000 less than what the seller was asking. And I did so by breaking a belief that he had. And I'm going to tell you exactly how I did it. And bonus, I'm going to give you a framework in the end that you can use with your sellers to ensure that you set up a deal that works for you, works for your seller, and everyone wins. Who am I? My name is Ryan Rice. I am a full-time real estate investor. I am in my fourth year investing full-time. I did 40 deals last year, and I share these things in the event that they're helpful for you making money in your real estate business. So I went on this in-person appointment this week, which, side note, I am experimenting with more in-person appointments as opposed to virtual. I closed all of my deals last year virtually, and I'll let you know what I find. But both before and during this appointment, the seller told me that he wanted $200,000 for his house. And after knowing what the house would be worth when it was fixed up, and after walking through it, I knew that there was almost little to no chance that the house would qualify for $200,000. It needed significant work, and the sellers really wanted and needed to sell before the wife had their baby. She was 8 months pregnant. And so I knew we had some work to do to figure out a deal here. And so I want to share with you exactly how the conversation went so you get some context on what I did, and then I'll share the framework with you. So I told him and his wife, and I had them both there. I said, Mr. and Miss Seller, I'm not quite sure what the property qualifies for yet. And frankly, I don't really care how much or how little the property qualifies for. I care about serving what it is that you both need, getting you to the next phase of your life. And so it doesn't bother me if you don't sell your house to me. But what will bother me is that if you're still in this house when the baby's here, because you both have voiced that there's absolutely no way in hell that we can let that happen. And so one way or another, we need to work to figure out together how we can make that happen. And for some extra context, it was a pretty tough living situation, not ideal for anyone in that house. And so, what this did, this initial statement, is this helped establish some same side selling, right? I let him and his wife know that I was on their team and I'm not trying to be a pushy salesman. In fact, I told them I didn't care if they sold me the house. I'm there for him and his family, not for myself, not for any personal profit benefit. And then I told him I was concerned I wasn't going to be able to give him what it was that he was asking for. I assured him that I would get him as much as I could, but that I was concerned that his own expectations are what may prevent him from getting him and his family into the next phase of their life. And so at that point, he started reverting back to and focusing on price. And he said, well, Ryan, my family's had this house for so long. I've put money into it myself. And to me, I know it might need about $20,000 worth of work. And there's some really, really good and big margins there. And you can make some money. And my family and I can get what we deserve for being in this house for so long. That he had a belief about the price of selling the home and what was fair and why he felt it was fair. And so here's how I addressed his belief. I said, Mr. Seller, it sounds like you're afraid that if you sell your house for under $200,000, it will mean that all the hard work you and your parents have put into this house would all be for nothing because someone else is going to come in and going to take your hard-earned equity from you, and that's going to crush you because you think that you and your family put in all this work and all this time and all this effort, and yet someone else like myself is going to come in and they're going to make more money than you are on your own asset that you've worked so hard for. And that's just not going to be fair. Is that right? And I could tell he kind of felt relieved that I understood how it was that he felt. And he said something like, "Well, yeah, absolutely." And this was an important step because by me saying that, it helped again confirm for him that I understood him. He knew at that point that I understood his deepest fear, right? Which helped, I think, further the notion that I'm on his side and that we're in this together. And so then I said, "Well, my fear, Mr. Seller, is that you having that belief is the exact thing that's going to prevent you from getting you and your family into the next phase of your life. And is it possible that that's a belief that's not serving you?" And he said, "Well, maybe." And then he just kept going back to the numbers, right? He said something like, there just seems to be so much margin. You can put X amount into it, you can get Y, and neither here nor there. But he was so far off in his numbers, right? He wasn't in the trades. He hadn't done this before. And that's okay. So I knew he was coming from a good place, and I knew his fears were simply a belief that he had that may or may not necessarily be true. And so I asked him, I said, "Well, Mr. Seller, let me ask you, what would you need to see to know that that wouldn't happen? To know that you wouldn't be, giving your house away to somebody if you sold it for less than what it is that you felt?" And he paused for a bit, and he sat there in silence for a second. And so I said, "Well, would it help you if I went through some of those costs with you? We've renovated a whole bunch of houses last year. We've done a whole bunch this year already. And I'm happy if you think it would be helpful to share some averages on what I've spent in different parts of a renovation so that you can kind of wrap your head around that. If again, would that help?" And he kind of said it eagerly, but he said, "Actually, yeah, that would be helpful." And so I went through that with him piece by piece, the kitchen, the bathroom, the floors, the paint, fixing the windows. He instantly saw that his beliefs around the amount of work needed and required to put into the house weren't exactly accurate. And I immediately wanted to shift his focus away from price and away from feeling like he needed to count our pockets, right? I wanted to shift his focus back to his own pain and what were the real issues at hand that we needed to solve together. That's what I mean. I don't want your perception of what we would make or you feeling the need to count our pockets to prevent you from getting what it is that you truly need for your family, because then nobody wins. And at the end of the day, the property is going to qualify for what it does. And I'm going to fight and I'm going to try and get as much as I can for you. But what's most important is we need to figure out how to get you out of here in the next several weeks. His focus shifted back into problem solving mode, shifted back into the current situation, into the current pain that he was in, and away from trying to count pockets. And when in all reality, he didn't really know how. He was just trying to count our pockets. Right. And I think that's an important selling technique. We have to ensure that the seller is focused on the right thing throughout this conversation. And so I said, "Well, Miss Seller, again, I'm just concerned I'm not going to be able to get you what it is that you're looking for. And then if that happens, you're going to stay in the house." And so I dug into this a little bit. I wanted to play this out for him. So we actually went through this together. I said, you know, "What would it be like if you did stay in the house? And what would you do then?" And he said, "Well, I guess I would have to hire my own contractors and I would have to pay them myself." And I said, "Well, we just went through, how much it would cost. How would you do that?" And he was like, "Well, I guess I would have to take out a HELOC." And I said, "Mr. Seller, you are working overnight. You're sleeping during the day. You're about to have a baby. When are you going to have time to manage and facilitate some large scale project like that? And nonetheless, do you think it's going to be good for your family financially for you to take a HELOC out on your house and try to do this work when you don't have experience doing it and be a father to a newborn baby?" And by the way, he had other kids in the house as well already. And as we were talking through this, the wife was there as well. And I could just see the look on her face. Right. And when we went there, it was very clear that that wasn't going to be a good option for them. And so once this came to light, once I kind of realized that, I said, "So what is something that I can fight for you on? What's a bottom line that I can take back to the team that you feel is still fair, but we can get you to where it is that you need to go? Because I'm concerned that I'm not going to be able to get you what you're expecting. Real quick, as you guys know, I just recently started this podcast. If you could give it a rating with a quick tap of the thumb, that would mean the world to me. And even more importantly, it could help spread the word to a broader audience, which in turn could help change a life. Thank you so much, and let's get back to the show. And so they thought about it for a second. They instantly said, okay, well, how about 180? All right. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to do my best. What are we going to do if the house doesn't qualify for 180? Again, I'm not even sure I'm going to be able to get you that, which that was honest at the time. I hadn't completely underwritten the property. I wasn't quite sure what we could pay, what the property would qualify for, but I wanted to confront the scenario to kind of figure out exactly how this would play out. And he said something like, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And in that moment, I knew that that was an important objection to overcome, because we need to uncover what their true concern is, right? We need to give them the information they need to feel comfortable making a decision, even if they tell us no, right? We need to play all of those scenarios out, because it's a lot easier to address objections before you present an offer than it is after, right? And so I told them that if I was going to fight for him, I said, we really need to know that he was ready and comfortable to rock and roll if I was going to give him what he's asking for. And that way I can uncover any concerns that they might have that have not yet come to light. And he reaffirmed and he said, well, 180K is my price. And so I said, well, honestly, I'm not quite sure I'm going to be able to get your 180, but I'll try as hard as I can. But I may not be able to get it. And I said, so, if I go out to my truck and we underwrite it together and my partners tell me that the property qualifies for 130, 150, 170, should I just not even come back inside? And he thought for a moment and he paused in silence again. And he said, just really try to get me 180. And if not, then we'll talk. And I think one last time before I went out to my truck, I reconfirmed what his bottom line was, which he, confirmed was 180. So when I went out to my car and I underwrote the deal, I realized after underwriting it that we were probably going to need to pay in the 155 to 165K range for this to be a deal. And I wanted to make sure that we started on the low end of that, because this house needed some significant work. There's going to be some inherent risk with this house, and just due to how much work that it needs. And so I knew it was important to get as much margin as we could to minimize that risk. And so I came back inside after we underwrote it, and I said, well, I'm really disappointed, Mr. and Miss Seller. And, honestly, I'm shot through the heart, because I don't know that I can get you where it is that you need to go. And I think we can all agree that we need to figure out a way to get you there. And I think what this did in the moment is it helped establish this psychological anchor, right? I'm sure when I went out to the truck, they had their own little conversation. But I could tell it did help establish this kind of psychological anchor. I don't know exactly where their head went, but I think instantly when I said that, they kind of thought that they were going to get something really low, right? And I threw out that number before I went out. I said, well, it might come back at 130, 150, 170, right? And I think that helped anchor them. And so then I told them, I said, well, look, here's what the property qualifies for. And I went through, this includes closing costs. And I told them that we would even move them and all this stuff. And I said, look, they told me the property qualifies for 155. And I was making eye contact with the wife when I said this, because I could tell, because she was the one that was pregnant. She had a little bit more emotional attachment to making sure that we get them out of the house before that baby comes. I wanted to understand what her reaction would be, because I knew a lot of the objection would be there. And I could see in her face when I said 155 that it's almost like she felt relief. And so I think that psychological anchor worked, because I think after I dropped it, she almost felt a little bit of relief. And so they both asked, it was almost simultaneously. They said, well, can we get 160 to 165? So we negotiated a bit. We went back and forth a little bit, and we landed on a little over 162,000. And so, boom, we had a deal. I had the purchase agreement ready to rock and roll, and I got their autograph on it. And so, for me, the biggest takeaway here, or the thing that I think I executed to help make sure that this was a deal, is breaking the belief that the seller had that it was unfair to him if he sold his house for less than $200,000. And there was zero chance of me buying his house for that amount. And no, for all you skeptics out there that think us investors rip people off, there's no way he could have even put 200 grand in his pocket if he listed the house. The house just needed too much work. And especially given the fact that he didn't have any resources, time or money to put into the house, he needed the flexibility of a closing timeline that was conducive for this baby coming and then moving in straight into an apartment. He couldn't deal with people coming in and out of the house because he worked overnight and he slept during the day. I mean, this was really not an ideal scenario. And so, a quick side note on that, these are the scenarios where us as investors, we can ethically provide a ton of value because we can give them something that they would not be able to achieve on the open market with a realtor. And it's nothing against a realtor, but a realtor just doesn't have the control in a transaction that a lot of the sellers who work with us investors need and want and desire. And so that's where we can provide this tremendous amount of value to them. And so if you're an investor and you're out there closing deals, be sure that you're thinking about that. It's important that you have 100%, 1000% conviction in the service that you offer and how much value you're providing, or else it's going to make it more difficult for you to close. And so here's the framework that I used. If we kind of extrapolate that scenario into a framework that you guys can put to use as you're closing deals. The first thing I did is I got on his side and I built trust. And I did that by doing the same side selling, right? If you remember, I said, hey, I'm not quite sure what the property qualifies for. And frankly, I don't even care if you sell it to me. Obviously, what's most important is we need to get you guys somewhere before the baby's here. And you have my commitment that we can work together to figure that out, regardless if you sell your house to me, right? So I got on his side. I built trust. I spent significant time with him and his wife just building rapport. But I think just by telling them out front that I wasn't there to get him to sell his house to me, that I was there to solve his problems, that really helped. The second thing that I did is I directly addressed the belief that he had, right? I asked him, what would you need to see to know that wouldn't happen, or to know that wouldn't be true? As it related to him feeling like if he sold his house for under 200 grand, that all of the hard work him and his family put in would go down the drain, right? I just directly asked him, hey, what would you need to see to know that wouldn't happen? And so I didn't tell him that he was wrong, or I didn't try to explain why there's no way his house was worth 200,000. I just helped him come to his own conclusion that maybe that belief that he was holding wasn't actually serving him and his family. The third thing I did is I refocused his attention. He kept bringing his attention back to price and trying to count our pockets, or how much margin that there was. And I kept refocusing his attention on the current situation, the pain that he was in. What are we going to do if we can't get them out of this situation? I walked him through all of those scenarios all the way to the end. And I made sure that we kept coming back to his pain and that we really needed to solve that. And then the fourth thing that I did is I anchored him, right? I said, look, I don't even know what your property is going to qualify for. It might qualify for 130 or 150 or 170. And if it does qualify for any of those numbers, should I not just come back in the house? Should I just stay outside? Right. So I put a psychological anchor in his mind that helped frame the entire closing conversation, or the entire offer conversation, a little bit differently. And so I do think this is a framework that you might find useful when you have sellers that have beliefs that are getting in the way of helping them. Every seller is a little bit different. Every situation is a little bit different. And when you have to overcome a belief, many times that can be a little bit more difficult of a close. And so I hope that sharing this framework with you can help you close more deals with sellers who are struggling with some beliefs that may not be true and that may not be serving them. And yeah, I hope you can use this to help somebody that maybe you wouldn't have been able to help prior to hearing this framework, prior to hearing and going through how I ended up putting this deal in contract. So if you think hearing this story and framework will help someone else, will help another real estate investor, feel free to share it with them. That's how this podcast grows, and it's good feedback for me. But I really appreciate your attention. I love you guys. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.